The interview that follows with Ben Harris-Quinney was scheduled originally to be part of the Just Political reality show going out on the 3rd of May. The interview is almost 45 minutes long. Ben and I, as you'll probably see, have a good rapport, and we, for want of a better term, got into it in rather more depth than I'd planned to. But rather than hack the thing to pieces and try and turn that into an edited anodyne version, I decided to keep it all and just publish 2 shows this week. One special and one the main show. I hope you enjoy it. My next guest is Ben Harris-Quinney. Ben is the chairman of the Conservative think tank, the Bow Group. Ben, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Chris. Good to be with you.
Ben, thanks ever so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. I'm mindful that time is always precious, particularly on a bank holiday weekend. Ben, would you be kind enough just to run through your own background and also the background and history of the Bow Group and its significance to the Conservative movement?
Sure. Well, first of all, I got involved in politics, about 15 years ago now, going all the way back to university. I mean, I'd always had an interest, and that interest came from my grandmother and her passion for Margaret Thatcher, and I suppose in part as well a natural interest. I was always more interested in history and that sort of thing at school, and I started off by getting involved in the Conservative Party and working in Parliament, and then I was living out in Spain, and in the run-up to the 2010 general election, I was heavily involved in their Conservatives Abroad operation, which was to get expats signed up to vote. We did a lot of that, and indeed, just the other day, we got the vote that we were campaigning for, that all expats should have the right to vote for life. But after that, the signs were there, but after that, it became clear to me that the Conservative Party, as a central party, as in terms of the party leadership, was straying away from conservatism. So I let my central party membership lapse, and the rest of the time I've really been involved in the Bow Group, which is Britain and the world's oldest conservative think tank. And what we do is we campaign for the ideas and ideals of conservatism, small c. And I think increasingly people understand the difference between the Conservative Party, or indeed Conservative parties all over the world, like those in Germany, or establishment Conservative parties like those in France. And people recognize that there is now a very significant difference between the ideas of conservatism, philosophy, the ideology, and those politicians who claim to be conservative. And we very much keep those ideas alive and hold the modern political discourse to the account of those ideas. And we have a huge amount of public support in doing so. My belief is that the majority of the country aligns small c conservative. Certainly the majority of the Conservative Party, and we are constantly getting messages and emails and things like that going through saying, why on earth won't the Conservative Party listen to you and be conservative? So there's a huge amount of work to be done, but I think the great advantage we have is that we are supported in our ideas by a very large number of people in the country. And I think what was most exciting for me, we had a lot of exciting stuff in the last decade, but it's got to be Brexit. That we managed to do that against the establishment of all political colours, very much as a people's movement. We managed to win the vote, and then win all the processes after that meant getting Brexit done. And we're still working on it with issues like Northern Ireland and fisheries, and making sure we're not locked into a lot of the EU schemes, the like of which were announced the other day, like an EU army. And it's so every Conservative knows there's a huge number of frustrations, and it can seem like everyone's against you, and the establishment's against you, the media's against you. But we've had a lot of victories in the time that I've been involved. And it's not been a wholly pleasant experience, but it has been a very exciting and interesting one, both I think for me, but I can also speak for the wider Bow Group, of which there are many people involved in, including yourself.
Indeed. Well, you've actually segued quite neatly into Brexit territory, and with the local elections coming up, the way I'm seeing things is the failure to trigger Article 16 is going to lead to a collapse in the unionist vote in Northern Ireland, opening the door for Sinn Féin as the largest party in Stormont. Yes, it's a power sharing arrangement, but the reality is they will then have the whip hand. And looking at the position in the Republic of Ireland, I can see the Dáil Éireann moving more and more towards Sinn Féin in 2024, potentially leading to a border poll. So I'm with you on Brexit. I think it's great that it was done, but I think it's half done. I think the failure on the part of the Conservative and Unionist Party to remember, on the one hand, that it is conservative in terms of its tax and spend and social and economic outlook, but also unionist, because I think it's been a complete failure on the part of the leadership of the party and a complete denigration of their former coalition partners in the DUP in Northern Ireland, and they really have cut people adrift. I think that's going to hurt the Tories badly at the ballot box on Thursday, because I don't think it's just an issue in Northern Ireland. I think there are people north of the border, I think there are people across the country who recognise that Brexit has not been done in the way they thought they were voting for in December 2019. What's your take on that, Ben?
Well, first, just to focus on Northern Ireland and Ireland, a lot of people have forgotten that Theresa May's government 2017 on was only able to govern with the support of the DUP, and the Conservative governments were supported in the past, but particularly that government was only able to govern with the support of the DUP. And what the Conservative government did was, as soon as they got the opportunity and the Northern Irish Parliament was suspended, they pushed through abortion and same-sex marriage against the will of the DUP, right, that were their partners. And I think that left an extremely sour taste, not only in DUP members and supporters' minds, but also in the minds of people in Ireland more widely that are supportive of the union movement, because what it essentially said was that the people in Westminster have no respect for you, they have no respect for your wishes or your way of life, and they want to operate with a high-handed dictatorial approach, that they think that because you haven't kept pace with Westminster in terms of gay marriage and abortion, it needs to be imposed upon you. And I think that's, you can argue that the rot had started before that, but I think that was at the point that a lot of people in Northern Ireland that had relied on the Conservative Party saw the Conservative Party as a beacon of unionism and defending the rights and the wishes of the Northern Irish people. I think it stopped there, and then we raised our concerns with the Northern Irish Protocol as soon as it was announced. It was very obvious it wasn't going to be fit for purpose, and then everything that has happened since, I think, has proven that and underlined that, as well as the inactivity in terms of it could have been addressed. Yep. The government had no right to make the mistake because we saw it coming and a lot of people saw it coming, but they didn't acknowledge the mistake quick enough and they didn't move to rectify it either, and they still haven't. And so I think it's hardly surprising that you're seeing what you're seeing in Ireland and Northern Ireland at the moment. I think it's a disgrace. Margaret Thatcher said that Northern Ireland is as British as Finchley, her home constituency. Right. I think that's absolutely right, and that's the way that she also saw the Falkland Islands and any British territory. And I think the attitude of the modern Conservative Party is to be sort of looking at it as an afterthought, as a backwater, as a group of people they clearly don't respect well enough to give them the basic courtesy of colleagues, let alone allies and supporters.
I think you make an excellent point. It's like a slow-moving car crash, and it's been coming for a long time. and the day of reckoning, I think, is coming over the next couple of years. I really fear for that. You mentioned fishing briefly. I'm mindful we need to keep moving because of time, but I mean, clearly Macron's re-election, and we've already seen some of his pontifications just in this first week since his re-election as French president. I don't really believe that Macron's going to look to do the UK any favours, do you, around fishing?
Not at all. I mean, I think the fishing industry and also the agricultural industry in Britain has been in steep decline really since we joined the European Union.
Yeah.
And I don't see anything from government that suggests that they want to reshore those means of production or support the industries that exist in their current form. And speaking to fishermen during the Brexit campaign, it was quite clear that there wasn't a generation coming behind them to take the industry forward in Britain in the future because of all the challenges they had faced and the huge costs involved to get into it. And I think one of the things we've been doing over the last few years in the Bow Group is working with organisations like the National Farmers Union and other parties in Parliament to really make the case that we need domestic food production in this country. And the attitude that successive governments have been taking is that basically, farmers need to get out of it and we need to concrete over all the land and build homes for mass immigration. But I think both in terms of fisheries and agriculture, the government needs a strategy to see growth rather than shrinking of that sector, and to look to a situation where we produce enough food for the British public on these shores.
Well, you've highlighted once again, we've talked about energy security extensively, both you and I in the past. Food security now is a major issue. Not only is Ukraine the breadbasket of Europe, vegetable oil, there are so many products now that are already in short supply. It's already beginning to impact supermarkets, consumers, the whole gamut of things. And why we ever allow ourselves to be dependent on others to provide raw materials, whether it be food or energy, that we have ample supplies of here if we just have a little bit of husbandry in our industry and a little bit of long-term thinking rather than the latest knee-jerk reaction to an opinion poll. I personally struggle with that. Ben, just give me a feel in short of what does a typical day/week look like for you? You've mentioned some of the organisations you've worked with, and it's quite interesting to note that being a small c Conservative think tank, you think wider clearly than the Conservative and Unionist Party for people to work collegiately with. Do you want to just run through what that might look like?
Well, that applies in the United Kingdom and also beyond. Yep. We work with international partners as well. And actually, over the last 5 years, we've been doing more and more of that. The pandemic, unfortunately, has completely upturned what the Bow Group generally does, which is regularly host events, conferences. Before the pandemic, I was going to a large number of conferences every year. And we were hosting usually 1 or 2 events a month. And the pandemic has changed that. Even though lockdown restrictions have lifted, the market has changed, and the way that operates has changed. So we are having to do a lot more online, which means a lot more media outreach, and a lot more platforms like this to reach people and open the discussion. Obviously, I hope that we can go back to what we were doing before, because that physical element is so important, meeting people and networking. And I think also what a lot of Bow Group members have said to me is that it was a community, and a lot of people that are at university or in workplaces, they feel they can't be Conservatives. Yeah. They feel that has become under attack, and if they are Conservatives, they can't talk about it, they can't give forth their political views. So one of the things that the Bow Group provided was a community as well as an academic discussion forum, and that's something that we really want to get back to. But of course, it's been this way for so many organisations, particularly those that are public facing. It's been very difficult to process those changes, and frankly, I can't believe that there's a pub or restaurant in Britain that's still in business, and my hat goes off to them. So yeah, it's a new way of doing things. I think politically, which has been aided by a lot of the technological changes, but I'm not one of these people that's saying, yeah, let's just switch to that and let's forget about the old ways of doing things. I want to go back to all of those as well.
No, I'm with you. I mean, you can see by the amount of grey hair I've got that I'm old school. I like to
at least you got some. At least
I've got no comment. It is real as well. It's not a syrup. But no, there's plenty of grey in there. And look, I'm with you. I like the notion of looking someone in the eye, shaking them by the hand, and knowing that they're a tangible human being and have a rational conversation with. And Zoom is a useful replacement for that. YouTube and social media are good adjuncts, but they are just that. They're an adjunct to the real thing. And like you, I can't wait to get back to conferences with the Bow Group, because from my perspective, the Bow Group gives me a fantastic platform. It really does. You're kind enough to publish some of my content. It tends to be longer read thought pieces that you and I will maybe kick an idea around, and then I'll try and go away and develop that to the best of my ability, and then largely you'll say, well, that's okay, but what about this? And then we end up with hopefully something cogent and tangible. There has been some scuttlebutt about the Bow Group, Ben, in different areas of particularly digital media. And I'd just like to put the record straight. Just tell me, where would you position the Bow Group on the political spectrum, both in terms of sort of fiscal and social conservatism? I know where I think it is, and I think it's exactly where it should be. But it's certainly not, as certain outlets would have us believe, out here in the car park with Genghis Khan. And I'm finding this sort of nonsense, untenable, actually, and unpalatable. And I think it's time the record was set straight, and I'd like you to do that now.
Well, one of the things about conservatism is that it is unchanging. It is based on really the lessons of humanity and the lessons of civilization. And almost, in fact, one of our senior patrons, John O'Sullivan, says that all organizations that aren't avowedly right-wing will eventually become left-wing. And you can look at the Church of England, you can look at the Conservative Party, and sadly, perhaps you can look at the royal family as being organizations that are headed in that direction. So we are simply small c conservatism on both a fiscal and a social track, and we draw our ideas from not just the last 20 minutes of polling, but really human history and the great thinkers and the great political leaders of the past. We had someone who, in my view, was one of the greatest conservative philosophers of all time in Sir Roger Scruton, who sadly passed away a few years ago. But I think if there's one man who could embody the philosophy of small c conservatism and of the Bow Group, it would be him. And I think there is an important distinction to make, in that small c conservatism is not the same as neoliberalism. It is not the same as globalist corporatism. It is not the same as open borders, let the market dictate, and an entirely laissez-faire approach. The Bow Group believes in prioritising British industry, prioritising British citizens, and protecting those interests. So, of course, we've got to have a market economy, but I think the debate increasingly in the public forum has become between globalist corporatism and communism. And I think a strong national identity and a protection for British business and a priority for British business and British citizenry is something closer to conservatism and also involves taking care of our own people and recognizing that there is a social contract that exists on that basis. So on that scale, you probably, depending on how you draw your political spectrum, economically, the Bow Group isn't right out there on the right with sort of certain groups or think tanks that believe in no social protections or really no form of government. In a lot of areas, we might agree with some of the people on the left when it comes to the preservation of natural habitats, these sorts of things.
Yeah.
But I don't think it can be, it is often relegated to that one axis, left or right.
Correct.
And it's obviously more complicated than that. And we saw this sort of playing out in the French elections, where people were saying Le Pen is far right. Macron, of course, never described as having any politics. He's just the good guy, and Le Pen
never
was
described as
right.
anything apart from a centrist.
Right, according to the BBC. But actually, again, if you look at the policies of all of the people that were running in the French election, it's become a lot more complicated than that. And I think those old rules of simple right-left politics don't apply. No. But conviction and ideas that are based on a clear and rational and long-term assessment of society and civilization, I think, are back in after the centrist era. And, Brexit and Trump are manifestations of that. And I think the third way centrism approach to politics is reaching a low ebb now, and we're going to see a return to conviction across the board.
Well, I sincerely hope you're right, and that would mean the end of the likes of Justin Trudeau, Jacinda Ardern, and dare I say it, other sort of acolytes of the World Economic Forum. Ben, in short, why should people join the Bow Group? I know why I'm in, and I'm very happy to be there. But just give in fairly short order. What's the attraction? People should be getting involved. I mean, I'm sure what people have heard today is going to resonate with, as you've said, instinctively, you believe the country is largely small c. Guess what? I believe with you. I share that vision. I share that passion. And so what do we do to get people in, and why should they join? What are we going to do to get people to join the Bow Group?
Well, I think people should join because we offer conservatism that they probably want when they're voting or joining the Conservative Party, and we aren't going to water that down, as I say, on the basis of current cultural mores or an attack from the BBC or any of that sort of stuff. We are absolutely going to maintain adherence to the Conservative philosophy. And I think that speaks to a lot of people, and a lot of people find that very refreshing, particularly, there are, I think, a great many people, and probably the majority, that feel this way. But if you turned on the media, if you come here from outer space and turned on the media and looked at our political discourse, you would think that, everyone was from centre left to hard left. So it's a forum and a place for people to connect with what they truly believe and realize that there are a lot of other people out there that believe those things. But the next step of that is that we've got to take that message out to the public, and we've got to challenge the politics of the day with the real views of the British public on issues from immigration to taxation to the woke agenda. And so, in the words of John Fitzgerald Kennedy, it's also about asking what you can do for the Bow Group, but more specifically, what you can do for the Conservative movement and therefore your country. And Brexit was a great example of what can happen if we all get together, put egos aside, and fight for a patriotic vision for Britain. Unfortunately, in politics, there are no settled battles. a new day begins and a new battle begins. And so I know there's a lot of people that dedicated a huge amount of time to Brexit and then said, right, well, I've done my bit. But unfortunately, the battle goes on. Yeah, and we need all of those people involved, even just to get Brexit done.
Yes.
But also, we didn't get Brexit done for the sake of it. We got Brexit done because we wanted to see a completely different direction, a different vision for the country. And I don't think that is reflected in the government of Boris Johnson, despite the promises. And therefore, there is still a huge amount of work to be done. So I encourage you to go to bowgroup.org and get involved and begin that process of fighting the good fight.
Well, I would say this, wouldn't I? But I have to say my time with the Bow Group has been extremely rewarding. It's a good place to be. It's a challenging organisation to work alongside, and I mean challenging in the very best sense of the word, because it makes you think.
I would just very briefly add to that, Chris, that a lot of people that aren't politically involved, especially those that have gone on to later life, they think that, well, you know, my career was in business. I'm not a politician, so I have my views, but I don't think I'll be good enough, you know, to get involved in a political organisation or writing articles or anything like that. And I think actually the opposite is true, that most people in politics know a lot, but they know a lot of things that just aren't so. And I think people, particularly in small business, have very good instincts about how the world really works, and could probably teach the Treasury a few lessons about basic economics. And I would encourage, you know, those people to get involved. Doesn't matter if you know, you're not up with all the latest buzzwords or you know, political theory, because a lot of it comes down to common sense.
Common sense and instinct. Some quick fire questions, Ben, if I may, because I'm mindful that time is marching, and you've been very generous with yours this afternoon, for which I thank you. Briefly, Russia, Ukraine. Is there a negotiated settlement available out of this, or do you think this could escalate all the way to a third world war, which clearly none of us want? Well,
obviously it could. I think the danger you have is a situation with a border territory. So it's not like Afghanistan. You know, the Russians aren't going to go away because they're in Russia. And I don't know if because of the amount of support from NATO and the idea that this has become a zero-sum game, that the territory of Ukraine has become a zero-sum game, I don't think that a military settlement, you know, a military conclusion could ever be the final settlement, because, you know, even if there is a decisive military victory in a year's time, in 2 years' time, it could turn into a flashpoint again. So I think there absolutely needs to be a peaceful settlement, and the interests of the United Kingdom, it tends to be the lens that I look through things first, are obviously not served by a continued conflict there. I think there is a very severe risk of escalation that could involve Britain, and I think we need to try and calm things down and look at realistic routes out of this for the sake of the United Kingdom, as well as the sake of Ukraine and everyone else.
That all sounds very pragmatic. It's a pity that there's not a little bit more of that at the top table. Ben, talk to me about the local elections. My view is that I think the Tories are going to get the usual midterm drubbing that most governments tend to, and particularly one that's been in power either in coalition or on its own now for over 12 years. And I think particularly in light of some of the recent Pestminster type nonsense that has gone on, there's a feeling that the Tories are running out of gas. My expectation is, although they haven't got that many seats to contest, the Tories could comfortably lose 750 seats on Thursday. If they do you think that moves the needle in terms of a leadership challenge to Johnson? And if so, where do you see that coming from?
It definitely does. The first thing to say is that if you look at Boris Johnson's favourability rating and the favourability rating of this government, it dropped by the most significant margin long before Partygate. And that's because, you know, as we've discussed before, it's just not delivering on the priorities of the people that voted for the Conservatives in 2019. Many of them, you know, former Brexit Party voters, former UKIP voters, or people that had just stopped voting but voted in the referendum, and believed that the Conservative Party had genuinely changed under Boris Johnson. I think that's the biggest loss for them of support, and that's going to be the big reason why they don't get a good result next week. But there's no question that whatever the reason, it's going to be used as a mechanism for people to usher themselves up the greasy pole. We're told about Jeremy Hunt having a leadership campaign ready to go, a number of other figures as well. And I think, we've had this situation, and I've been called a traitor and all sorts, but it became very clear to me very quickly that David Cameron wasn't a proper Conservative. I came out and said it. Came to blows with the Conservative Party and him over that. Now, I don't think anyone would disagree with that. Same thing with Theresa May. We said at the time, the Brexit supporting organisation said at the time, this is a disaster. She doesn't get it, and she didn't. And I think we can all reflect upon that as being what happened. Boris again came in, promised to be the saviour, promised they'd learn the lesson, and clearly they hadn't. The idea that the answer is to go back to a Cameroon figure is just absolute madness. And I think if they do that, they'll be back to those sort of anemic hung parliament territory, or straight up losing to the Labour Party. The reality is that conservatism is popular. We saw that in 2019. Yeah. If you launch a patriotic, conservative, pro-British campaign, then you win elections. That hasn't changed since Margaret Thatcher's day. And it's very frustrating that the Conservative Party spent so long trying to court Lib Dem voters and leftists that might have liked, gay marriage as a policy idea, but were ultimately never going to vote for the Conservative Party. And so I think if Britain is going to be run, because you can debate all the political parties and the ups and downs, but if Britain is going to be run the way I think most British people want it to be run, the way we want it to be run, there has to eventually be a coming together of the right. All of these disparate parties, Brexit, Reform, Reclaim, Heritage, SDP, go on and on, and the Conservative Party itself, I think they need to come together, and we need to find a new leader, like Margaret Thatcher was, and like Nigel was for the Brexit movement.
David Frost, maybe?
Could be. I think he's someone that understands the problem, and understands what needs to be done, and understands why this government isn't performing in the way that people hoped it would. But
it's not a Conservative government then, is it? I mean, in all but name.
Well, it isn't. Well, it isn't.
Not
but again, imagine looking at that and thinking, oh, well, the solution is another sort of cardboard cutout of David Cameron. It's obviously going to be a disaster if things go down that route. And I think the big problem with it is, if it goes down that route, it will be very undemocratic. That will be the decision of a few hundred people as to who the Prime Minister is, rather than the membership of the Conservative Party, or rather than the country as a whole. And I think that's a dangerous route.
I think you've just raised a serious point there that I don't think other people have grasped. Jeremy Hunt potentially could do a Theresa May. In other words, if Hunt stands and nobody opposes him, he's the leader. That's it, done. If Boris is voted out through a vote of no confidence, and Hunt is the only candidate in the race, and there's a pact within the Conservative Party for that to happen, we end up with Hunt as Prime Minister. It does not go to Tory members. Now, there's an argument for saying Tory members may well vote for him, but if they're going to vote for him, 34% of them voted for him in 2019, and 66% voted for Boris. Now, Boris in 2019 had a comfortable, loose relationship with the truth, and that's not really changed in the interim. I don't believe he's done a particularly good job since winning the mandate in December 2019 with the biggest majority the Tories have had since 1987. And I think there's a question of Boris actually being the least worst option. And to my mind, if you've got the least worst option, you're heading for electoral defeat in a landslide level. It would be the swing that Starmer needs to win a majority at the next election is bigger substantially bigger than the swing from Major to Blair in 1997, just to a one-seat majority. What people don't get, though, and we're already seeing evidence of it in where the Lib Dems and Labour are not putting up candidates in certain areas, partly because Labour's bust, but that's another matter. The potential for an anti-Tory coalition between the SNP, the Lib Dems, the Greens and the Labour Party, whether they want to call it a pact, whether they want to even admit to it, is enormous. And if they get the Tories out, they'll keep them out. They'll keep them out for a goodly long time, in my view.
Yeah, and that's why I think we need to do the same. We need to have a solidified ideological movement.
Absolutely.
Even if initially it means that it spans a number of parties.
Yep.
And I think we're well on our way to achieving that, because you look at the new channels we have, the new media channels, the organizations that are out there, that most of them are not fulsomely supporting the Conservative Party. They're supporting a set of ideas. Correct. And if the Conservative Party move in line with those ideas, then they'll support the Conservative Party. If they won't, they'll look to Reform or to Lawrence Fox or that kind of thing. And I think if we can solidify that movement over the next couple of years, that's going to be the only way, as you say, that this rainbow coalition can be countered. And in terms of the Conservative Party itself and leadership elections flowing from it, as you say, we've got a situation in the country as a whole where 2 out of the 4 last prime ministers weren't duly elected.
No.
They fell into that position. We've got a situation where 2 out of the last 4 Conservative prime ministers, or prime ministers generally, were members of the same 12-man dining club at university in the Bullingdon Club. I think there's a sense that, again, with the Brexit vote, people wanted things done very differently, and they wanted to be in charge of that process. And there are a lot of aspects of British democracy, both in terms of political parties and in terms of our constitution metaphysical as a whole, that I think are not fit for purpose in a modern democracy. And the antidote to almost all of these things is putting people back in charge, having the open primaries to select the candidates, having the votes of the membership rather than a few hundred people in Parliament, or it being a total stitch up and there's not even a vote of a few hundred people. These things need to be put in place and codified, so that we can ensure that that it's not the men in grey suits, or 50% men and 50% women in grey suits now, as we've got to remember, making the decisions, but it's the people. And that's, like free speech, that's kind of more important than getting on to the policy ideas. Those principles are so core and fundamental. And I think if you lose under those principles, if you have a debate under the terms of free speech and you lose, if you have an election that is completely free and fair and you lose, you can still take solace in the fact that it was a fair fight, and then you've got a chance in the next one. That idea, I think, has been sucked out of politics in Britain, and maybe beyond Britain. And those are the most important things we need to fight for to return.
Super. Would you call yourself a free speech absolutist, Ben?
I am. There's no, you can't be a little bit pregnant.
I was going to say it's a bit like the Buffett quote about making a woman pregnant in a month by getting 9 of them pregnant. You're either in or you're out with free speech, and free speech means all free speech. Now, you and I know, would probably disagree with George Galloway on just about everything. But I tell you what, I defend his right to say what he says, and I defend everybody's right to say what they say, even if it's horrible, even if it's about me, even if it's about my family, however personal you want it to be, an ad hominem attack, bring it, that's fine. Because guess what? That doesn't hurt me. Words don't hurt me. But I think that this, and I worry deeply about the online safety bill. I'm going to have to get you back on to discuss some of these things at a future juncture. But I think, this notion that it's only the left that wants to suppress free speech is not true. And the things that you've talked about there, potentially with Jeremy Hunt and the sort of, as you say, the grey suits of the Conservative Party controlling things. It's got to stop. That it's got to become much more accountable, much more democratic, and actually, fundamentally, much more conservative. Because at the moment, it would break every rule of the Advertising Standards Agency.
Right. I mean, there is, I believe, such a thing as the wisdom of crowds. And if the Conservative Party had listened to its membership throughout all of the farrago of the Brexit process in the last 10 years, and you know, may I humbly say, listen to the Bow Group, because what we are really doing is representing a voice of the people, and that Conservative voice, and for some reason they lose that signal in Westminster, and it always ends up being to their ultimate detriment. But I always say that the Conservative Party only do the right thing if you've got a gun to their head with the trigger half pulled. So
does it help to lose and end up fifth in the European elections to win an election 7 months later? That kind of gun to the head is that
well, exactly. And it's everything that could have been predicted. It was obvious what needed to be done after the Brexit vote, but they just didn't get it, and they still don't get it on a range of other issues. We've had this announcement today that Oliver Dowden thinks the solution to misbehaving MPs is to have a top-down imposed 50% men, 50% women. That's the opposite of the solution. What you need to do is have a primary process before the public, and then the public can decide who their representatives are, whether they've been looking at porn, whether they haven't been looking at porn. It's up to the public to decide what's acceptable to them, and to be able to change that decision as frequently as is possible, and scrutinise their elected officials as frequently as possible.
I would question whether Oliver Dowden is actually a Conservative, even though he's chairman of the Conservative Unionist Party. But bearing in mind, as we both know, whether you count Theresa May as a good leader or not, we've had two Conservative prime ministers. If you look at the ethnic complexity of the cabinet, you will not find a more diverse cabinet that's ever been in British politics. We do not need to take lessons from the Labour Party or anyone else on the identitarian left about women-only shortlists, because that's what gave us Claudia Webb. And how did that work out? Where there is no proper due diligence done. It's if you're a woman, you're in. You know, it's worked incredibly badly in South Africa, this kind of system, and bringing it to the UK is a terrible idea. It's not conservative. As much as anything else, if you leave everything else aside, that is not conservatism. You know that. I don't have to tell you.
No, of course, and this is why I challenge it so strongly coming from Oliver Dowden. I mean, we know that the Conservative Party is no longer conservative, but they still operate under that banner, and that's why it's got to be so strongly challenged. And I think the most outrageous thing about it, again, is that it isn't what the people want. No. The people want their own democratic decision-making powers to be enhanced. And then if they want a man, woman, animal, vegetable, mineral, it's up to them to decide. And this idea that, oh well, you sit in America with Joe Biden, great news, we've got a black woman vice president, a black woman Supreme Court justice. What about the results? What about the skyrocketing inflation? What about the economy going down the pan? What about mass immigration? That's what people will respond to if you solve their problems. I don't think people really care what color you are or what sex you are. It's about results and it's about performance, and that will always be assessed best by the people you represent. So I completely reject all.
Sorry to interrupt. I think it's as simple as the best form of equality is equity.
Right.
Right. Meritocracy. Otherwise,
everyone can put their hat in the ring, and the people decide.
Absolutely.
No quotas. I wouldn't have a single quota, and we don't have them in the Bow Group at all. I mean, I'm sure we'll all be put in prison one day for that, but
well, I'll be there with you, so we can. Well, at least we'll have a good story to tell. Right. Ben, it's been absolutely joyous to have you. We've massively overrun, which is brilliant. But I'm actually going to now roll this out as a complete segment on its own, because I'm sure that lots and lots and lots of people are going to want to view this. And if you've got the time going forward, I will be getting you back on, please, because I think, you know, an awful lot of what you say, of course, it resonates with me. Yeah, we have very similar worldviews and outlooks, and I'm not really into echo chambers, but I think it's important that people understand there is an alternative to what currently masquerades as conservatism. I think you presented that extremely powerfully today. You do it regularly on GB News, and I seriously commend the Bow Group and you. And I would say to people, don't hesitate, just join.
Thank you, Chris. I really appreciate that. And if you've got people watching that are keen to get involved, follow us at Bow Group on Twitter, or go to our website for more details of how to get involved at bowgroup.org. But thank
Fantastic,
you very much,
Ben. Thank you ever so much for joining me on this, what is currently Sunday afternoon, going out a little ahead of schedule, although, as I say, I think the schedule's now out of the window, which is great. I've really enjoyed it. I really appreciate your company and your time, and have a super weekend.
You too, sir.
Cheers, Ben.